Hey, joining me today on Statistically Speaking, of course, is Tom Durezzo. Tom, the Director of Product Management for MLS Listings, of which Aculist falls within. That
That's right.
your job is to keep bringing it up to speed and working with Michelle Ronco on new reports and things like that. But one of the coolest part of the Aculist offering is Dr. Elliot Eisenberg. So, folks, as we get going, we've got a lot of information. We want to move over from Dr. Elliot to you. We've got some questions rounded up, but the key thing is engagement from everyone out there in the audience, Tom. And we're using that chat box down there at the bottom of the screen. If you've got a question as the dialogue's going along, or maybe you brought some questions with you, get them in there into the chat box. Michelle Ronco is look at this, the doctor saying, "Bring them on, bring them on." Uh, Michelle is in the background getting them compiled and put in the right order, and she'll let Tom and I know when we're ready to go. So yeah, audience participation, yay! Bring it on, Tom. Huh? Tom, you're going to get us going today. Let's dive into those
Well,
questions.
yeah. Hey, Dr. Eisenberg, Elliot, so good to
Elliot,
see
please.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so good to see you as always.
Likewise.
And I guess the last couple of days we've had some news, right? So
That's an
yesterday,
understatement.
yeah. So yesterday the CPI report came out, and I believe it was a little bit higher, maybe. So I'm wondering if you could start by just reminding us what CPI is and why it's important, and what that means. Um,
Sure. Great questions.
yeah.
So
So
CPI stands for Consumer Price Index. And so instead of saying consumer price, we say CPI. We think of that as inflation. That's the most common understood consumer number for inflation. They say it's 9.1, it's 2.6, whatever. Oh, that's year over year inflation last year. So to give you some perspective on CPI, Consumer Price Index, it peaked out in somewhere in the out 9.1%.
wow.
And it's now come down quite extensively. And depending on how you measure it, it's somewhere between two and three quarters, three and a half, somewhere in that range. It varies a little bit. If it's core or headline or whatever, we can get into that if you want as well. But it's what you think of when you buy a pair of pants, go on a trip, buy a concert ticket, have a haircut, whatever it is. That's the number we generally think of. Not what the Fed uses, but what we use. It's been in existence for decades and decades and decades and decades and decades, and that's why we continue to use it. The data came out yesterday, just as you said, and they measured two different things I mentioned earlier: headline and core. Headline is what we think of as inflation, everything.
Yeah.
Core excludes food and energy. Now, you may ask, why on earth would you even measure inflation without food and energy? That's really stupid because you'd be not going anywhere at best. Your car wouldn't work, no air conditioning, no heating, no food. Be pretty bad. But those things bounce around like a basketball because of war, energy prices, and weather, food prices. And the Fed can't alter our consumption of food or weather or oil very well in the short run. In the long run, oil prices go up. You buy a smaller house, you get a more efficient car. Sure, you carpool, but not in the short run. So the Fed tries to ignore the the headline, the headline, and look at the core number instead, because it
Mhm.
gets rid of food and energy. We know it excludes food and energy. We know that's kind of weird, but it's a better measure. In decades we've learned that. And the problem is the headline numbers keep coming down. It's very nice. But the core number the last 3 or 4 months has leveled off.
Mm.
And it's just hasn't gone down. And the question is this like a permanent new feature? Is the Fed going to fall short of its goal? It cares more about core than headline, remember? Or is this a speed bump on the way to success?
Mm.
And the general consensus is it's a speed bump on the way to success. And it's not just happy talk, we're saying. The reason is that there are a couple of weird things driving the inflation. Now, this past month, there were more things driving inflation. That's why it's a little bit more concerning. But the primary drivers are rents. And we know that year over year rents, like if you look for an apartment to buy, to rent,
Mm.
the rents aren't going up. But the way the government measures them, they're still up at 5%. And they measure them by asking everybody who rents, hey, what's your rent? Did it change from last month? So you're getting everybody. And that's weird. You should only be asking people who change apartments or change, get a brand new lease. So on the way up, it goes up slowly. On the way down, it comes down slowly as a result. So it's coming down slowly. And it's like 30 or 40% of CPI. So it's a huge, because rent is a huge percentage of your spending. It'll come down, it'll help. The other weird thing is car insurance. Cars prices have gone way up, both the electric car prices, new ones, and just regular internal combustion engine ICE cars have gone up in price. So it takes about 2 years for the insurance companies to go to the insurance commissioners and get permission to raise the rates, and now the rates are going up. This is not an annual 15% a year thing. It's now very high because it didn't go up for a long time. They lost a lot of money, and now they're asking for big raises. So this will work itself out. So the expectation is the combination of the rents and the car insurance will lower this down some more. Whether we get to the promised land remains to be seen, but the expectation is it'll get lower. Now, I suspect I'm getting ahead of you a little bit. So if I get ahead of you, just stop me. The question is, will the Fed cut rates at their next meeting in roughly a month? And at this point, based on this data, I'd have to give it a coin toss. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say what's going to matter really a lot is the labor number that comes out at the end at the end of the month and into November. So early December, we're going to get the number for November. If that's a really lackluster number, and we don't have a big revision from last month, because last month we had 12,000 jobs, and that was because of a Boeing strike and Helene and Milton hurricanes. So if that bumps up, if that doesn't bump up much, and the November number is terrible, they're going to cut rates. But if we get a nice pleasant revision and November numbers turn out to be okay, we get in early December, they may pass. Odds of, and then producer price indexes numbers came out today. They were also just a tad tight, a high. So I think the Fed, and then we know Trump's is going to be the new president again. He's president-elect, however you want to define him. And there's fear he will do all kinds of things that push inflation up. The Fed's a little nervous here. As to what will Trump do? We can't guess, we can't plan, we can't anticipate because he may not know. Congress has to get involved. It's complicated. So the Fed is saying, "Oh, wait. I hope they cut," but their fear is if they cut and then in 3 months they start to raise again, they'll look stupid. So they prefer, if they're going to have to raise at the end, or they don't want to be whipsawing the market. That's the key. Cut 6 weeks later, raise. Bad. They look stupid. So they may hold off, but it's a close call. I would say it's 60-40 they cut, but it's close to pretty even odds.
Okay.
Gotcha. Elliot, last time we were together in August, we were seeing, just before the drop in the interest rate, right? It was all looking good. We're all feeling good about it. You talked about the concept of baked in, that the change had sort of already been implemented even before the Fed made their announcement. Do you see that again coming up? Either, baked in going up or baked in going down?
At this point, I think that the cake is still being they're still
Okay.
churning the batter
Stirring.
because there's so much uncertainty back 3 or 4 months when rates came down, right? There was a noticeable decline in rates.
Right.
We had sales, some pending sales went up, refi activity went way up because we thought we knew what was happening. And now all of a sudden, what we thought was going to happen may well not happen because the CPI yesterday, the producer price indexes today, the victory by President Trump, President-elect, former President Trump and President-elect Trump has sort of given us all reason to reassess. I want to spend a minute on the behavior of the market since Trump has won. I really suspect the market's overdoing it here, but the market doesn't call me up, right? But if you look back 4 years ago, you look at Obama's history, GDP-wise, and Trump, yeah, it's a little better. I mean, forget COVID, of course. Nothing remarkable. You look back in history at the Trump era, yeah, GDP was better in 2019, 3%. We had a tax cut in 2018. I got it. But there was nothing that was like overwhelmingly wow, I think is my point. So I think the market, as usual, has gotten ahead of itself. And they're expecting big tax cuts, which Congress may not allow, massive deregulation, which will take a while to implement, and so on and so forth. So nothing happens as quick as the market thinks, and a lot of things may well not happen. So just as the market got ahead of itself a few months ago and got ahead of itself in January of 24, right?
Right.
It's doing it again to some extent, and this time it's in a bad direction for interest rates. Rates are going up because the fear is he'll increase the deficit, increase inflation, tariffs will increase inflation, and so on. So this may happen, but will Trump really come through with what he wants? I think that he tells us that's the question.
Right.
So
Right.
we'll see, but there may well be some change this year.
Sort of stay tuned.
Right, stay
As with
tuned. I
all
don't know the answer
economics.
either, but stay tuned. Good way to put it. Yes.
You bet. Tom?
Yeah, well, so Elliot, we're here to talk about the real estate side of things, and what we've seen so far in 2024 is that it's actually been a much better year than 2023. We're seeing higher inventory, we're seeing more sales getting closed.
Prices
How
continue to rise.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you see this into 2025? We've talked in the past about the lock-in effect, right, of low interest rates. Is there anything that's going to break that lock-in effect? Do you expect, inventories to continue to rise?
It's a great question. It's the $1 million question. Look, I'd be hard pressed to expect long-term 30-year mortgage rates to get, but now they're in the upper sixes, like 6.75, something like that. I didn't look the last couple of days, but they felt a six, I'd be pretty happy camper. They came to 5.75, I'd be ecstatic. Now, President Trump's proposed policies in many cases offer an opportunity for inflation to rear its ugly head. That said, I don't believe that President Trump realizes that part of the reason he won the election was because inflation was very bad under the current Biden administration. So I don't think he'll be that cavalier with letting inflation out of the bag here. So I suspect that the market expectations are a little too much. Okay, that said, now get that aside. Look, there still aren't enough houses. So if with inventories as low as they are, prices will probably continue to rise. Incomes in your area, in the MLS listings area and north of you, right, are good. AI is becoming a huge monster. There's no question that the amount of spending and effort put involved in office space being rented and so on is intense, and you are the epicenter of it. So this is a very fortunate thing. I mean, who knew this 2 years ago? No one knew this was a possibility, let alone a reality and an unbelievable amount of fermentation, intellectual fermentation, and so on. So I think 25 will be a pretty good year. The stock market's doing well. IP mergers and acquisitions are going to improve now because the new administration is going to be much more favorably disposed to it compared to the outgoing administration. That pushes up stock prices and so on. Equity prices, the market's done very well, so people have more money. Those options are worth more. So yeah, I think it will be a pretty decent year. You'll be outperforming the nation as a whole. Let's put it that way. In terms of the lock-in effect, unfortunately, that's still there. And the fact that if rates come down to 5.5, that's the magic number, below five. They get to 5.5. People begin to go, oh, well, I have a 4, but 5.5, okay, I'll do it. But 6.5, 7, I'm not going to do it. So, and they've interviewed people and asked what percentage of homeowners with mortgages of say 3% would leave if they came down to 6.5, 6, 5.5, 5. When you get into the fives, the percentage willing to jettison the old mortgage starts to go up. So whether we get there or not remains to be seen. It depends on inflation and it depends on what Trump does. And most importantly, with Trump, there's a couple different things going on there. It's when he does it and how much he does. A 10% tariff on one country, who cares? Across the board, huge. It's different. Early, late, the magnitudes matter here as well. So we're really in the dark about this.
So one of the things that actually came up, I think, during the campaign on both sides was ideas to stimulate new building, and do you have any thoughts on what we might expect in 2025, or is it in the Bay Area, in our area, maybe not much?
It's hard. I mean, Trump didn't have as much on housing as Harris had. Harris had the $25,000 first generation, 10,000 first time, and this effort to build 3 million extra homes. Those ideas all ranged, in my opinion, from bad to worse or from poor to bad, I would say. Not, it was like they were all C to D quality ideas. But it's hard to make it. National government doesn't make housing policy, unfortunately, right? It's a state and local affair. There's some state issues involved, of course, but generally it's local zoning and planning and so on and so forth. So it's very hard to get cities and governments to change their policies. That's the big issue. Someone asked me in jest, and I'll say this, and I'm probably going to annoy half the audience here. Oh, California, less than half, but nonetheless, someone asked, "What is Trump's policy on housing?" I said, "Well, if you get rid of 5 million illegal immigrants, you'll have a lot of empty houses." I mean, that's not the plan. Don't get me wrong here. And the other fear with President Trump is if he imposes tariffs, that will no doubt raise the cost of housing because a lot of the components, electrical components and wires and junction boxes and so on, are imported. It's no longer possible to physically build an entire 100% manufactured component part U.S. house. A guy in Montana tried it, and it was not successful. He just couldn't do it. This is years ago. So there's some pluses and minuses on that side, And if the immigrants are in fact go back voluntarily or involuntarily, the houses aren't all in one place. They're not all in Silicon Valley either. They're dispersed. Right. So a lot depends on how many of them live where you have and how many rent an apartment or own a house where you are. It's not so easy to know the answers to these questions.
Yeah.
I hope that's somewhat informative.
Right. Hey, Tom, we've got questions coming into the chat room. Want to let everyone know we're seeing them. Michelle's in the background. We had some folks, join in late. So want to just remind everybody that chat room is there for, to, if you've got a question on any of the topics we're discussing, or you want to go someplace new with the economics of the area and how it affects real estate, the chat room's the place to get it going. Michelle's getting them all collected for us.
Cool.
One of the questions that I see actually has to do with Elon Musk. And I guess there's been some discussion about what happens to the Fed under a new Trump administration. And has there been any chatter, or is there anything that you can tell us about that?
Yes. So the Fed consists of 19 the Fed OMC, that's the interest rate setting part of the Fed. The Fed does other things in regulation and all kinds of other open market operations. But there are 19 people on the FOMC. Of those 19, 12 vote at any one time. Of those 12 that vote, it's complicated, but 5 are presidents of Fed banks. So one of them is the San Francisco Fed, run by Mary Daly. She's selected by the board of governors of the bank, if I'm not mistaken, but it's done within the San Francisco Fed, determines the people there, determine who the head will be of it. Not Washington. It's each bank picks their own president. 5 of those 12 vote at any one time. So Trump has no control over any of those. Out. Then there are 7 governors of the Fed. They vote at every meeting. So there's 7 of those and 5 of the president. That's the 12 vote. And the other 7 watch and they take turns voting. Of those 7, those are all appointed by the president, but the boss is Congress. So they have to answer to Congress, but they're appointed by the president and they have to be ratified by the Senate, of course. Confirmed by the. Now, during the 4 years of Trump's upcoming term, only 2, if I'm not mistaken, come due of the 7. And the first one is Powell. And Powell's is in May of 26. So it's a long ways away. So the only way Trump will have influence over the Fed is by slowly appointing, 2 out of 7 governors of the Fed. He will never have as much influence as he wants or as much influence as he could have had conceivably last time when he came in with 2 or 3 vacancies to begin with. So he could really put his people arguably on. But now it'll take a long time to get there. So the expectations are very minimal that he will have meaningful impact on the Fed anytime soon or even over the length of the 4 years he's there. Okay. He doesn't have enough people to put in.
Okay.
So worry about something else.
Well, going back to the new build question, we did have a specific
one more thing.
Question.
He can't replace Powell. He can't replace Powell. He can't get rid of these people, more of them than then their term expires unless they're woefully negligent for malfeasance. So it's a high bar. Can't do it.
Okay. Okay. Back on new construction, what about in the common interest area? Do you think we'll be seeing more builds? And, do we expect rents to come down in price over time?
On the second question, I'd be very surprised if rents came down. The problem is we're not building enough single-fam houses. We can single-fam attached, detached. We're just not building enough houses, period. And because of that, people have to live somewhere, so they're going to rent. And as a result, in the short run, we may see some rent declines. We overbuilt a little bit, not so much in your area, but other parts of the country. There's overbuilding in the South, Tennessee, Georgia, the Carolinas, Florida, Arizona. Those states have seen some extra building. But to see rents decline, I'd almost be willing to come on the show and eat my shorts with some ketchup or something if I saw that. In terms of new construction, yeah, I would much like to see more condos and rental apartments come up. That would be economically much more affordable than building single-family detached houses. Takes up less space and so on and so forth. But it's still not easy. But it's easier and more affordable. So you'd think that would be the right place to go. So yes, I'm optimistic, but rents don't come down. No, 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 no.
Okay. Okay. So, we've really been fixated on inflation. And, it seems to be heading into a desired range, or at least, manageable. Right. So where should we look beyond inflation? What's the next thing that we should be looking at? Is it inventory? Is it,
Yes, absolutely. It's months of inventory, not just inventory. It's nice to know how many units are available. 74,000 or 61,000, or nationally, it's now at 1.3 million or something like that. That's nice, but that's just supply. As an economist, it's always the laws of supply and demand and the intersection that matters. And you're going to get that through months of inventory. That's
Okay.
if you're going to look at one number, that's the number to look at. As it inches up, we would expect to see price appreciation rates go down because buyers face larger choice of homes to purchase. They can negotiate harder. The balls, they have more leverage when there's more homes for sale. When there are fewer homes, the buyer has more control. So, and over time, over the last year and a half, that number's been slowly inching up. So
Okay.
it's gone from a very strong seller's market to now much less of a seller's market, but still edging towards the seller side. But if it gets closer to 5 months, then it becomes pretty even. It's above five, then it becomes becomes a buyer's market all of a sudden. So we're inching back to normalcy, I would say. And we're inching back to normalcy importantly because inventory is rising, not because sales are so hot. Sales are okay, but they're nothing remarkable, even in where you are in Silicon Valley, where they're better than they are nationally.
Right. Okay.
But it's months of inventory. That's the one key variable. If you have one to be able to look at, that's the one.
And the number that you said is like 5 months, right?
If it gets above five, that
Yeah.
really the pendulum's really net. If 2 months is here at the buy on the seller side, and 4.5 or so, five is somewhere here in the middle. Gets beyond five, now we're beginning to inch over to the sellers having the buyers having the edge.
Okay. So I have I think a pretty interesting question, having to do with what about the fence sitters, the people who are thinking about, buying a home, but they're not quite sure, and the new administration is coming. Is that a reason for them to hurry up and dive in? Is it a reason for them to like just wait and see? No rush.
I could argue both sides of that one, but the more important one I think is the election's over and the
Yeah.
election ended quickly. There was not a month of turmoil like there was in 2000 with Gore and W, right?
Right.
Or last election or two elections ago, whenever it was, when it took forever. Last election, I think it was.
Yeah.
So this is all good news. And prior to the election, everybody was nervous. If you wanted Trump to win, you were terrified Harris would win. If you wanted Harris to win, you were terrified Trump would win. So everybody was stymied. In the election, the polls were very close. Didn't end up quite that close, still quite close, but not as close. So everybody pulled back. Now The Trump supporters are going to say, well, our guy won, let's buy. And the Harris supporters are going to say, okay, I'm not going to wait 4 years, so I better get on with the show. So I think all in all, the election being behind us is an unambiguous good for the housing market. We can argue how much is good, but it's certainly good. And in California, Silicon Valley, probably less good than it is in I'm making up here Montana or West Virginia, the two most Republican states in the country.
Right, right. Mark, do we have
Yes.
any other questions at the moment?
Well, Tom, you went to an economic session yesterday at hosted by Realtor.com and their
Yes.
chief economist over there. I'm reminded by Michelle because you can't if somebody's talking economics in a 4 square block area, she needs to be involved in it. She says Realtor.com session yesterday, a point was made that many voters were frustrated by the economy and voted as such, but the economy isn't actually in too bad of shape. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Eisenberg?
I fully concur with that. Unemployment, by the economic measures, the economy is good. We're creating a decent number of jobs. It's come down, certainly, but unemployment, even though it's higher, but up off its low of 3.4, it's 4.1. GDP growth is very solid at close to 3%. Objectively, inflation's now down to, roughly 2.5, 3. You can argue which measures and CPI and core and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
These are objectively good measures. The problem is people don't think they're doing very well because a great stat, personal income went up. I get the numbers wrong here, but get the idea. 20% during the Biden administration. Great. But inflation was 23. That's the problem. When you have income not keeping up with inflation, people get angry with justification. And inflation was very high. And those combinations, I think, very much made the electorate very sour and predisposed, apparently, we now know, towards not voting for for VP Harris, or not even bothering to vote. The number of votes that Democrats received came down substantially from 4 years ago. So they were very sour, I think, and it caused some of those to vote for, obviously, in a opposite move to vote for incoming President Trump. So you're right. The data is objectively fine. If someone told me these are the data points, I'd say give that economy an A- or a B+ at worst. Doesn't matter. Perception matters more.
Gotcha.
So another question has to do going back to, after the election, you said the market ran up and maybe got ahead of itself. In addition to stocks, we saw this really enormous increase in crypto. And what are your thoughts around?
I thought so. I should have bought like $1 million of crypto like 8 days ago. But
yeah.
I again, it's somewhat irrational exuberance. The stock market's done remarkably well as well. There, I have some stock.
Yeah.
Thank God. I have some of that. I have a few shares. I mean, I'm kidding, but
Yeah.
it's just everything's gone up. Everything's done except for gold. Gold's done poorly, but everything else is on the Trump rally, similar to what it was back in 2016. But this has been a more intense rally this time around. And the expectation is that he will do a lot of things that will cause juice growth and so on. And I said to you earlier, I'm a little skeptical, not because he's a politician. So, I mean, I'm joking, but you get my point. But no, it's hard to impose your will. I mean, there could be a war, weather, oil prices, a shock, this or that, some technology. Congress says no. I mean, look at the House. The House of Representatives has the Republicans, I think, picked up 1 seat in the House, but 3 of their members or 4 of their members are gone for one reason or another. Stefanik has become UN Secretary. Waltz is now becoming head of national intelligence. Getz resigned before the report came out that would have made him look really bad, obviously. And now he may be at AG, although I suspect that he won't pass in the Senate. So their majority in the House and Senate is going to be very small. 3 seats in the Senate and maybe 3 in the House or 4 in the House. Getting things done there will be hard. And importantly, Boone won the Senate majority leader position yesterday because McConnell's retiring and his retirement starts on when the next Congress begins in early January.
Yeah.
And he is an old party, old time. I wouldn't say old time Republican. That's pushing it, but a traditionalist more than Scott would have been from Florida, who's a gung ho Trump MAGA guy. So it'll be a little bit more deliberative. The relationship there will be, I wouldn't say fractious, but it won't quite be as wildly cordial as it would have been under Scott. So what Trump wants to do, if he needs permission from Congress, it could be a little more rock. So the crypto, again, is saying everything's going to be great. He's going to put in people very favorable towards crypto. We're going to treat it fundamentally different than currency and different than other stuff, so that we can buy and sell it with much more positive, easy rules, regulations, and so on and so forth. Expanding the population that can buy it, making paperwork requirements less, and so on. 50% increase seems a lot in a week. That makes me nervous. When you see things going parabolic, I go, hey, yikes.
They tend to come down too.
Yeah, but yes. But the other thing to keep in mind at a macroeconomic level is all crypto together is now worth, with this rise, $3 trillion. It's not that much money. I mean, it's more than you and I make, but it isn't enough to drive the economy into waxing or waning wildly. And more importantly, there's not a lot of debt here. That's the most important thing. If things crash and there's no debt, if you own the Bitcoin that crashes, well, you just lost a lot of money. But if the banks lose a lot of money, that's much more serious. And we have no evidence of banks lending. Now, the way it could be doing it, what makes me nervous, is private equity could be lending, and the private equity could be borrowing from the bank. The bank could be 2 steps removed. We don't know because it's private. There's no data. But on the surface, I'm not sitting here thinking this is a potential bad, big problem that we have to worry about economically. I'm not. So it goes up, great. People get rich, they'll spend more money. That'll help the economy if it keeps the rise, keeps the increase.
So one of our audience members, since we're talking about the next administration, was saying that another campaign promise is tearing apart the Department of Education. We know that there's a direct correlation of school performance to housing value. What might happen? More private education, less geography impact for local good schools, or is this, can't worry about it?
Don't even, this is something I would not spend much time worrying about. And this is because education is a state function. It's not a federal function. I mean, the feds have tried to elbow their way into it. Don't get me wrong, but the amount of money involved, the rules and regulations, textbooks, and so on, it's not a federal function. I mean, California. I'm not an expert in the area, but I would venture to guess that California has 20 times the impact on textbooks than the federal government, because California being the biggest state, all the printers want to sell books in California, and therefore they also sell them in other states. This is a very minor show. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Gotcha. Tom, we've even though AI is coming back, or AI is coming strong at us, and we're seeing back to work orders being issued by some major companies, but driving around Silicon Valley, Santa Clara County, even San Mateo County, we've got some empty buildings out there. And one of our audience members is asking about that repurposing of commercial space, Dr. Eisenberg, and penalizing land banking, right? Just the grabbing of land, but not doing anything with it. Something to worry about, something to be concerned with. Are they rebuilt? Can they repurpose the old Google building into some nice condominiums for people?
It's a great question, and I haven't driven by the Google building, so I don't honestly know. Okay, so forgive me, but I've spoken to a bunch of architects about this, and the problem you have with newer built buildings is the floor is completely buildings where you have a square with a hole in the middle.
Right.
You have like a cloister. I'm not sure that's the right word, but you get my idea.
Right.
And if you have a cloister, you have windows onto the interior of the complex.
Okay.
And those interior windows are critical because the building is only, imagine it's an inch square all the way around, right? As opposed to 4 inches by 4 inches of pure office space. If it's 4 by 4 full, the interior has no windows.
Right.
You can't retrofit it. It's not possible. So the older the building is, generally speaking, the easier it is to retrofit. So now, if they're fancy, newer buildings that have great views everywhere because they're built by rich people in Silicon Valley, I'm kidding here again, but you get
Right.
the idea. Maybe it's easier to retrofit. But it's the older the building, the easier to retrofit. That's the story.
Okay.
And we know new buildings are selling like hotcakes, are renting very well. You know, they're diamond certified or LEED certified or gold certified,
Right.
and they run on used sauerkraut and old oil from McDonald's or something. Those buildings are popular.
Yeah. We
What
had
was the
a
second question? There was two parts to that question, if I'm not mistaken.
the second part was land banking. Should there be legislation to, do
Discourage
something
it.
with that property?
Yeah, at some level, you don't want people to hoard empty lots, essentially,
Right.
right? It's pretty hard to do that.
Hard
The
to,
only places that do that through their tax policy is Hawaii and I believe Pittsburgh.
interesting.
And
Okay.
what they do is they tax for property tax purposes, they value the land at best possible use, regardless of what you're using it for. And as a result, if you were to take a parking lot and put an office building on it, your property taxes would not rise.
Right.
So it's a very strong incentive to do it, but other cities don't do it for obvious reasons. Politically, it's very, very hard to do
Right. It's
this.
almost like eminent domain kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. In part, you're forcing things, right? So
Right.
yeah, with the Supreme Court, yeah,
Yeah, I can see that. I'm thinking, back on the comment on repurposing commercial buildings over by our building, there was for years since the 60s, 1 and 2 story concrete tilt up, and there was no, and they were all commercial and they all eventually went empty, but there was no thought of, refurbishing them. It was just bring in the bulldozers, and those 50 acres were just cleared over the weekend and the condo city went up. I mean, they're doing it where they can, but we tend
I
to
mean, some
tear down.
some cities have tried. I think Calgary, Canada, has been, I think, very, very aggressive in offering developers incentives to keep the building and retrofit and redesign.
Interesting. Okay.
And the thought was, well, we're better off giving them the money than having the building sit empty and get no tax revenue from it. And that's a, a thought process that cities and counties have to go through. And are we prepared, or do we just bulldoze the whole place and start from scratch?
Right.
Those are both reasonable solutions.
Gotcha. Tom?
So Forbes just mentioned in, I guess, an article. I haven't read it myself, but they said experts say that now might be the ideal time for buyers to get ahead of a potential demand surge in 2025, one that could drive home prices up again and leave would-be home buyers out in the cold. Do you agree, or do you think they're being a little, pushing a little much?
So the theory here is good. The theory is rates come down, everybody people put their house on the market, and there becomes a frenzy for housing. This is it's possible, right? I mean, if rates come down, more people will put their home on the market because they're waiting for rates to fall to buy another house and move up
Yeah.
or move down or whatever house they're looking for. It's possible. And what will rates do? I don't really know. But I don't think rates are going to fall enough to generate that kind of a process. I'd be very surprised because again, uh, Trump's Trump's policies tend towards the inflationary side. There are some that aren't. Deregulation clearly is not one of them, right? But tax cuts certainly are. There's no question. And the migrant thing, side of the houses is an inflationary thing. So you have to get very good decline in home price, increase in supply of houses because of a nice decline in interest rates to get that story. I'm not there. I'm just not
Okay.
there.
So I think we have one more question and then our lightning round.
Yeah, where
So,
all the big prizes are gobbled up.
right.
This is where the
So,
big money comes in.
Winners get
so,
what, Starbucks cards. I'm kidding.
so the last question that we have is, how does persistent unaffordability impact housing demand in the Bay Area, and could this ultimately alter buyer behavior or market dynamics? I assume by people, looking outside of the Bay Area, right? But what
Right.
are your thoughts on that?
I'm a pretty happy guy on this one. I think housing prices in Silicon Valley are utterly unaffordable. They've been utterly unaffordable for a long time. They remain unaffordable. They get progressively more and more unaffordable. So, and that doesn't seem to have stopped much population numbers. I mean, California is not growing in population because people can't afford to live there. So people leave, and then rich people come in. So the population's stable and pleasant and happy and okay. And you've gotten into a steady state situation where you're underbuilt, prices went crazy. They're now always relatively expensive compared to everywhere else in the country, with the exception of New York City and Honolulu or something. But yet things go on. And I joke, yeah, what's your house worth there? Well, my house were there, be worth double the price or triple the price. But incomes are higher, and people just accept that they'll be house poor, and their mothers and fathers give them like a $500,000 down payment, and so on. And we have proof of this because of COVID. When COVID came, people left because they could live wherever they wanted to live. So some people I know around the country left their jobs and moved to a place like Seattle or San Diego, where I am now, and and Silicon Valley managed just fine, thank you very much. It wasn't that there was a mass exodus and prices collapsed. No, other people came in, AI came in, something happened, and moreover, and more importantly for Silicon Valley, uh, other cities didn't take their mojo. The thought was, could uh,
Right.
Austin, Boston, Raleigh, and those cities really do have some mojo. They're clearly number two cities behind the San Francisco, San Jose area. The next tier is those, but they didn't grow appreciably. And then the tertiary cities, where I live, like in Miami, where there was hope, oh, we'll become a high tech village. What, are you kidding me? Well, crypto, they tried to do crypto, so that may come back. But kidding aside, those cities, really, Denver, they didn't really gain a lot of it. They didn't get traction. So Silicon Valley had a terrible shock, and it didn't really affect them. They remain by far, as much I hate to say it as a Miamian, the center of the tech world, despite the possibility that enough would move to Boise or Seattle. And Seattle has some, don't get me wrong, but nah, I don't see that being a problem. I really don't. It would be nice if housing got cheaper there, of course. That would help. But if it doesn't, it's still okay.
So, in terms of, what we should worry about, it sounds like because you're sort of saying, don't worry about Fed changes, don't worry about Department of Education,
Okay. Okay. So now I'm going to go on record. What to worry about?
uh,
What to worry about? The
yeah,
thing to, so yeah, tax policy, yeah, whatever. He'll cut them a little or a lot, whatever. Yeah, that's normal. It's normal give and take of every administration does their stuff. Drill, baby, drill. Yeah, whatever. It's immigration. This is the single biggest thing. He's going to reduce illegal immigration down to zero by having 1 million border guards if he can. He has to get the money. It's going to be complicated. Congress will fight him, whatever. But that's his aim. And then he wants to deport people. This can be touchy. If he deports 1 million people and they voluntarily leave and it's easy, whatever, fine. And if he deports the baddies of the baddies, not that there are many, but if you get them, who's opposed to getting the criminals that are illegal? It's fine. But if
right.
he's able to begin to deport millions of people over time, this would have extreme effects on the economy, and I'd be very, very nervous. This is the one thing he does, or he's talked about doing, that when I can't sleep at night and I wake up, that's what I'm thinking about. It's nothing else. Deregulation, that one's a good one. I have to drill, baby. I'm enthusiastic about these for different reasons, but this immigration thing is potentially very sinister.
Could change,
Okay.
some profile aspects of communities, uh,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And we are attached to these workers. That's the
yes,
issue. Our economy has now is living with them, and they have all kinds of jobs. And I talk to people in communities, and they say, I didn't realize we had such a large number of immigrants, but then I drove 20 miles out of town, and all the farmers there, that's all the employees are,
yep,
Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, whatever. I'm making it simplistic. It's not quite that simple, but you get my point. So if we lose these workers, wages start to skyrocket, GDP goes down. I mean, this is not a good economic thing. Politically, whole different story. I don't want to go there. But economically, I'm very, very nervous about that. That's the one policy he's got that really curdles my blood.
Right.
potentially curdles my blood.
Tom, Pat Kapowicz, who's a good friend of the MLS, always a supporter. He does have one question. I think it's important. I live in a community, that is always wondering about my insurance. Um,
Oh,
oh, yeah,
next question. What's
exactly.
that lightning round going on? Where's
Yeah,
the lightning round? We
Yeah,
need
I
it.
we're
know.
still going to do that, but what you mentioned insurance companies before. They're coming back for a little more of the pie. We've lost all this money, and we yet they are they're raising their payments. Their premiums. They had lost
Yeah,
that way, right? And now, and yes, I have neighbors who've gotten that dreaded letter, from name your insurance company of you're not going to be our insurer. We're not going to insure
right.
you anymore. Um, it's got to affect pricing on houses, single
For
family.
sure. And you see it's not just in the places you think about, like Louisiana, Florida, and parts of California. It's much more broad than that, right? So you see insurance costs going up, and in California you see it like places like Grass Valley, for example, right?
Right,
Because they live in the middle of the forest. Well, it's lovely, but the forest burns down from time to time. Well, now you're going to pay for it. So you got the property insurance going up. You have HOA fees going up if you're in HOA, and almost all new constructions in an HOA. And then you have uh, uh, other taxes are going up too. In the
right,
last election, several states passed ordinances, state constitutional things, like California did back in '78 with Prop 13. States are doing it now. Other 4 or 5 states, including Florida, passed things like that to put a damper on. And yes, and the reason it hurts houses is as follows: if I come to buy a house, the realtor says, "Well, how much do you have in a monthly ability to pay every month?" And I say, "I have $5,000." I don't care if it's condo fees, taxes, insurance, principal, and interest. Whatever it is, it's $5,000. If you raise the condo fee or raise the taxes, the insurance, there's that much left for principal and interest.
right,
So something's got to give here. Now, fortunately, there's inflation, which pushes incomes up and productivity goes up. And as you get older, you get increases in wages and so on, generally speaking. So there's a general drift upwards, and that can compensate for some of that. So it's not like it's a zero sum game year after year after year, but certainly any upward pressure on those other costs has to exert negative influences pressure on home prices
right,
for sure, or slower
exactly,
appreciation.
right.
Yes, 100%,
Yeah.
100%.
Not to mention my water district, my fire district, everyone wants a bigger chunk of the sandwich these
Because
days.
the repair costs are higher, the construction costs are higher,
Yep,
the input cost, the design cost, everything is more expensive.
across the board. So,
Right. And we're all
Tom,
suffering that everywhere.
let's roll to the lightning round.
All
Like I said,
right.
where all the big prices reside. I'll let you take it from here, Tom.
Okay. Well, Elliot, just we're just looking to get your thoughts, simple yes or no on some of these things. If you want to expand on it, feel free. But
Okay.
will there be more Bay Area home sales in 2025 than 2024?
I would say yes.
Okay.
Stock
Um,
market's better. Merger acquisition activity is good. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a mild recession likely later in 2025? Question mark.
I've gotten much more optimistic on that, so I really don't think so. I'm going to go on record
Okay.
and saying 25 is a good year. Yes, I think the tax
Okay.
cuts are coming, and while that may have some inflationary impacts and hurt the deficit and so on, in the short run, it'll be a plus. And the expectation of those cuts will be good. The economy's fine right now. We're okay. The lower
Okay.
population, bottom quarter, struggling, but no, I don't see it.
Consumer credit borrowing and debt, is that a concern? That
It's a concern, but yes, we
okay.
touched it just now. If you look at
Yeah.
the population in like different groups, how people that have a home and a portfolio, they're doing well. You have a
Yeah.
home and no portfolio, you're still doing really pretty well. If you have no home and no portfolio, you're really struggling. They're struggling. And they're the people who are having debt problems. They've maxed out their credit cards and their delinquency rates are going up. That's a problem. It's not going to sink us like the office space problem won't sink us, but it's a mild problem. Yeah, yeah. But
Okay.
income levels, interest payments as a percent of income, they're okay. They're okay. Nationally, they're okay, but they're confined to certain people and they tend to be lower income. They're not going to be
Okay.
buying homes in Silicon Valley. Just
Okay.
remind you.
Yeah. How many rate cuts next year?
Oh, it could be anywhere. So before the election outcomes of last week, the betting was one more cut this year, probably 5 cuts next year, 4 or 5 cuts
Okay.
next year. Total of 6, up to 6, minimum 4, up to 6.
Okay.
Now, if you told me now I could tell you maybe 3. It really
Oh,
depends on what Trump is able to accomplish through executive order, what his tariff policy. And tariffs he can do just by an EO in the office, right? He doesn't need Congress to
yeah.
do that. So that and the border, those are things he controls unilaterally as a president. There's a lot of control there. Budget issues, he needs budget money, but he can do a lot right there. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
a definite, I have no friggin' idea.
Okay. uh, Mortgage rate below 6% next year.
I'd have to say no. From where we are at
Hmm.
closer to 7 now, I'd have to say unlikely.
Okay.
Unlikely. So I'd hedge, but I'd say no. If I had to say yes or
Okay.
no, I'd say no.
Um, Stock market, will it decline early next year? Because you'd said, it sort of
It's
run up a
high.
bit.
It's
Yeah.
run up. But will it go down? Yeah, nothing would surprise the stock market. A 20% decline wouldn't surprise me. Doing nothing wouldn't surprise me. But in the long run, it's very highly priced, and there's not a lot of drivers that are going to push it much higher. Could it keep
Yeah.
going up 2 or 3% a year? But the market's been very surprisingly strong for several years already. It's gone well above what I thought was possible. So clearly,
Yeah.
I don't. No one understands the stock market. But Warren Buffett's holding a lot of cash, a couple hundred billion in cash. Um, okay, I'll say the likelihood of a decline probably is higher than an increase. But again, it depends
Yeah.
what Trump does. Trump
Yeah.
really, in the short run, he does have a lot of control because if he lowers corporate taxes from 21 to 15, well, that should increase corporate earnings all by itself, which should jack the stock market up all but mechanically, right?
Okay. Yep.
And every percentage point drop in taxes leads to about a 1 percentage point increase in earnings. So this is a very strong and powerful relationship.
Um, we've seen some layoffs in the Bay Area with tech companies. Uh, Tech unemployment will be higher in 2025 than 2024. Yes, no.
I'd venture mildly, yes, but very mildly. We see this actually in chip companies. Chip
Okay.
companies that make chips for AI are doing really, really well. But Intel, for example, and AMD, just laying off workers because they got chips going in the wrong sector of the economy. And that's the same problem you face with the Silicon Valley with the hires and the layoffs. It's exactly the same thing. You're in the right city, you're almost in the right industry, but you're just a little off where you should be. And that's going to kill
Yeah.
you a little bit. So, and I think the wages of the people in AI is so high, the desperation is so strong that firms want to control costs where they go a bunch of these guys and replace them with some AI that can do software engineering for them and write Python code. Because I can
Okay.
write, I am not a coder.
Okay. Okay. Do you
So
have any view into commission rates? And do you know whether commission rates are likely to hold steady in 2025 or based on the NAR settlement? Do you expect that, yeah, in fact, maybe commission rates would decline?
oh, and I would ask, what settlement? I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Uh, I saw some data last week from I can't remember where Redfin, perhaps, but one of those types of brokerages, right? And so it was just their houses. But since the settlement, it showed commissions on the, I guess, the buy side, uh,
Mhm.
not the seller, but the buyer commissions, had fallen by like 8 basis points or 0.08%, a non trivial amount. I mean, that's not
Yeah.
nothing. So they've gone from 2.8 to 2.74, maybe 2.7 to 2.63, or something like that. That's a decline. And I, as the economist in me here, is saying, I expect commission rates overall to decline. We can argue why or how, whether it's the buyer agent, the seller agent. It's beyond me. But I think that they do decline because of this a little bit.
Okay.
I think that
Okay.
realtors in the long run will be busier with more transactions and maybe making a little bit less per transaction. That's what
Okay.
economic theory suggests. But there are a lot of reasons why this will not happen either, right? There are a lot of reasons. It's a really complicated, idiosyncratic thing that people buy a house once or twice or three times in their life, most people. It's not, it's infrequent. You know, people don't talk about what their commissions are. It's very hard. It's like healthcare. Things should happen, but it doesn't because it's weird.
Right.
So, but those would be my two expectations. So we've seen a little bit of a decline, and it would surprise me if we saw a little more.
Okay. Okay. So that was it for my lightning round. But just to sort of, wrap it all up, what should real estate agents be talking to their clients about? What is your, recommendation?
I think I say this over and over again. If someone wants to buy a house, buy the house. You want to sell your house, sell your house. People who are waiting. I have a friend of mine, their son wants to buy a house. And his father said to him, well, wait, rates will come down. That's 2 years ago. He's still waiting. I mean, he's 27, he can wait. But what's the point? Get on with your life. You can always refi down the road. The key thing is to buy a house you can afford. Don't stretch right now for a house. Likely in 5 years, you'll regret not buying a more expensive house because you'll make more money. And suddenly what was expensive 5 years ago becomes cheap. I've done that a couple of times in my life. But don't stretch on your home purchase. Just do it and get it done and hope rates come down. If something happens, God forbid there's a recession, they'll come down a lot. You can refi then. Waiting for rates, waiting for this, waiting for that. Yeah, you wait and your life goes on. You don't run your life to make a few bucks. You run your life to enjoy life and have fun and have a place that you like and paint the color you want and put pictures up and make holes in the wall and bash the wall down. And you can't do that if you rent.
Yeah.
So, and you're going to do it anyways one day. So, yeah. And at the end of the day, more importantly, and anybody who owns a house now who bought a house 10, 20 years ago will validate this. That extra 10,000 you spent on the house, it was well worth it if that was what got you the house because you love the house, you're in there, it's been a capital gain, you've rearranged, you're happy with your community and so on and so forth. And the 10,000 just doesn't matter, or 20 or 50,000 or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you don't want to be stupid and throw money away and leave on the table, obviously, but don't wait for rates.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if our audience wants to become more educated about the economy, we recommend that they text the word bow tie to 66866, and that will sign them up for a very short 70-word or less blurb from Dr. Elliot Eisenberg in their email that gives them some insight into what's going on in the world from an economic perspective, right?
Right. Absolutely. It's fun. I enjoy doing it. The response is very favorable. People enjoy it. No one's sent me like a death threat yet in 10 or 12 years. So obviously I'm hitting on all cylinders. It's a low bar, but nonetheless, yes, absolutely sign up. I look forward to having you as a reader, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully in the near couple of months. We'll do it again, right? 3 months or so.
That sounds great. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Eisenberg.
Thank you. Michelle, thank you. A big shout out to you too. Thank you in the background.
Have a great afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Statistically Speaking. Bye now.